Welcome to Ends and Odds Part 1. I will cover 3 death stories, 2 of which had a great impact on Manatee County, of which Sarasota was part of at the time. The last part of the presentation will cover some odd stories and old ads. As with my previous presentations, these are stories from the old newspapers of the area, the Manatee River Journal and the Sarasota Times. There is also one slide from the Sarasota Herald. The first killing is a story I have told before when I talked about 5 Points. The previous talk did not include the monumental acts after the killing. The map has 2 arrows. The yellow arrow points to the Sarasota House, also known as the Vincent House, which was a boarding house that had been managed by Joe and Rosie Vincent since 1886 when it was built. In 1899, they purchased the building and lot. This is where the killing of Richard Jeffcott took place. The green arrow points to the Vincent Brothers restaurant, where implications of wrongdoing may have happened and where a blind tiger may have existed. A blind tiger is a person or establishment that sells alcohol in a dry county. I don't have pictures of the young men who had a part in the killing close to 1902 when the event took place. Instead, I have a picture circa 1887, 15 years earlier, of the Vincent family. Charlie, or Charles, is pointed to by the yellow arrow and Marshall by the green arrow. I don't know their ages, but in 1902 they appear to be in their mid to late 20s. From about 1900 to 1902, the 2 young men started their own business on Heigl's Pier, which later was known as the City Pier. At that time, the bay was lapping at Gulfstream Avenue. The business, the Vincent Brothers Restaurant, was an oyster bar, following a string of other oyster bars at this spot. I do not have any specific history on the restaurant itself, but the earliest oyster bar located here was owned by Waddy A. Bacon, who served a mug of corn beer free with each meal paid for. Manatee County was a dry county, and it was illegal for anyone to sell alcohol, but not to own alcohol as long as it wasn't in excess. Richard Jeffcott came to the Sarasota House for an evening meal which Mrs. Rosie Vincent was serving up. Jeffcott got in an argument with James Collins about a boat using bad and profane language. Rosie Vincent was reprimanding him about his language when Charlie Vincent arrived in the dining room. Charlie told Richard to stop the language or leave. That was when Jeffcott told Charlie that he would fight him outside. He then grabbed, beat, and threatened Charlie with further physical harm. Charlie broke away and moved toward the rear of the dining room where his mother was. Richard followed, and as he approached the rear of the dining room, Charlie, in fear for himself and his family, shot Richard with a pistol. At about the same time, Marshall hit him on the head with a chair. Richard Jeffcott died, and a coroner's jury was formed, taking evidence from the witnesses, concluded Richard Jeffcott came to his death by a shot from the hand of Charlie Vincent in defense of himself, his mother, and his home. Oh, but that wasn't the end of it. The next day, William Jeffcott, brother of Richard, filed a murder complaint to Sarasota's Justice of the Peace and friend, C.B.S. Wilson, the owner and editor of the Sarasota Times. C.B.S. Wilson arrested Charlie and Marshall and held a preliminary examination which culminated in locking the boys up awaiting a circuit court trial. C.B.S. Wilson then wrote editorials bemoaning blind tigers in the community and charging that Charlie and Marshall got Richard Jeffcott drunk before he went to dinner at the Sarasota House. It didn't help that the Vincents were Republicans and most of the community were Democrats. The circuit court judge in Bradentown ruled that the boys could be released with a smaller bail amount, but Charlie still had to stand trial. The defense lawyers complained that C.B.S. Wilson who had presided over the case, was judge and jury in the press. In the meantime, such a fuss was made of the killing and blind tiger in the community that CVS Wilson and William Jeffcott convinced others to meet and consider incorporating Sarasota into a town which would give them legal latitude to arrest suspects without relying on the county sheriff and judge. A meeting was called circa July 13, 1902, a Monday, where J. Hamilton Gillespie was called to chair, William Jeffcott acted as secretary, and CVS Wilson had crafted its resolutions. A good number of participants didn't even live in the area to be incorporated. The vote was 26-1 for incorporation. The history books describing Sarasota's incorporation say that the progressives, like Gillespie and Heigl, wanted to push the community forward, but as we look at the resolutions, you will see that it was the killing of Richard Jeffcott that sparked the meeting, brought the residents together, and highlighted chasing the evils out of Sarasota. When you see the names of the participants, one name is conspicuously missing: Joe Vincent. After the vote, a committee was to draw up a legal notice of intention to incorporate and advertise the next meeting in August. Then the resolutions to establish moral protection of the town were read. On motion of CVS Wilson, the resolutions were adopted with only minor disagreements. The resolutions. Whereas the town of Sarasota has lately suffered much from lawless traffic in liquor, whereby the peace-loving and peace-abiding inhabitants have been severely injured and annoyed, and whereas these lawless proceedings have culminated in the perpetration of a brutal and cowardly murder in our very midst, we, the undersigned inhabitants of Sarasota and vicinity, hereby solemnly and sincerely promise and agree. First, to carefully consider the question of incorporation, impartially weighing the advantages to be gained against the probable expense of gaining same. Second, with individual and united energy to use our best endeavor to see that all offenders against the state liquor laws be brought before the courts and made without fear of favor to answer for their misdemeanors. This resolution to cover all past as well as future transgressions. Third, to use all legal means to protect the good name of our town, pure in life and law-abiding in character, and of good repute throughout the state, so that honorable peace and prosperity may rest within our bounds. Fourth, to assist in wiping away the stain of the recent murder from our annals by controverting falsehood, suppressing conspiracy, and in flooding the courts with the clear, bright light of truth, not in vengeance, as that is in a higher power, but to show the rest of the state that we cannot remain inactive under the unbridled insolence and license of parties seeking their own welfare in the degradation and slander of others. Fifth, we intend to work in harmony for the furtherance of our town, recognizing that united we stand, divided we fall. Signers. Although the vote showed 27 votes, there were 35 signers. At least 8 of the signers did not live in the original Sarasota plat. It was noted that Harry Heigl and Sam Highsmith objected to the words brutal and cowardly murder and preferred the word tragedy. A committee of 3 drew up a legal notice of intention to incorporate, and it ran in the Sarasota Times. A meeting on August 14th decided the boundaries of the new town, which included the original plat and 4 parcels along the bay and Hudson Bayou. After a legal delay of 2 months, qualified voters chose Sarasota's first municipal officers and approved the incorporation on October 14th. Per the Manatee River Journal reporter, out of 50 votes, 38 approved the incorporation and 12 were against. J. Hamilton Gillespie was elected as the first mayor of the town of Sarasota. The aldermen were W. J. Hill, H. L. Heigl, G. W. Blackburn, J. B. Turner, and J. O. Brown, the local doctor. The motto and seal was created for that meeting. The motto was, "May Sarasota prosper." The seal included a sunrise or sunburst, mangroves, a mullet, and seashells. A follow-up on the Vincent brothers. Charges were eventually dropped for Marshall. After several delays, the trial ended in December 1903 with a split verdict, 7 for a conviction and 5 for acquittal. William Jeffcott attended every court hearing concerning this case. It was noted that the case had been continued until the next term of court. However, I saw nothing in the local paper after that. The Vincents, probably harassed, sold the boarding house to J. H. Lord in 1903 and moved to Tampa. The next killing was along the Braden River, not too far from today's Lakewood Ranch. It was the first crime in Manatee County that produced a death penalty. The story starts with school children of 2 families, Lamb and Kennedy, who attended the same school and had a childish fight. On Monday, January 4th, 1904, Ed Lamb, outraged about the incident, went to confront Dave Kennedy at Williams Sawmill on the Braden River. Lamb demanded Kennedy punish his children for the incident, but Kennedy refused, saying his children promised to behave in the future. That was not the answer Lamb was looking for, and he attempted to cut Kennedy with his knife. Mr. Kennedy, however, being a much larger and more powerful man than Lamb, disarmed him and made him promise not to molest him further, and thought the trouble ended. Enraged even further, Lamb went to his home a short distance away and grabbed his shotgun and returned to the Williams Sawmill. He approached Kennedy, and at 20 feet away he shot. Kennedy walked a few steps and collapsed. Not done, Lamb reloaded and walked up to the lifeless body and discharged another load, setting his clothes on fire. There were witnesses, but they were so shocked at the event they allowed Lamb to escape. Lamb was captured in the southern part of the county, probably around Venice, and was taken to the jail in Bradentown. Fearful for his safety, Sheriff Easterling sent the prisoner to Tampa to await court action. On January 25, 1904, Judge Wall called a special term of the Circuit Court of Manatee County. Ed Lamb pled not guilty. Days later, he was found guilty of murder and given 60 days to appeal. His execution date was set as October 27, 1904. While waiting in jail, he wrote editorials about being saved by his Lord. He recognized he was evil, but now he was saved and resigned to his fate. Lamb dressed himself for the scaffold with great deliberation, and at his request was photographed after being attired for death. Lamb's son, brother, and sister-in-law were present when he mounted the scaffold, but were overcome and left before the drop fell. The doomed man kissed them goodbye and asked them to meet him in heaven. His wife was unable to come to the jail and see him for the last time. At 12 minutes after noon, Lamb climbed onto the platform and was dropped. The rope slipped and he fell to the ground unconscious. He was hung a second time while still unconscious, breaking his neck, and was pronounced dead by Dr. John Halton from Sarasota. Note, Lamb's wife went to the authorities the following February and gave a sworn statement Before his execution, her husband showed her the jail key, which he kept secreted in his stocking, waiting for the right opportunity to use it. Just before her husband's execution, he told her that he had turned the key over to the fellow prisoner, D.C. Tanner. Lockwood Ridge, Sunday, October 21st, 1917. Wikipedia. Holy rollers is a term originating in the 19th century and used to refer to some Protestant Christian churchgoers in the holiness movement, such as Free Methodists and Wesleyan Methodists. The term describes dancing, shaking, or other boisterous movements by church attendees who perceive themselves as being under the influence of the Holy Spirit. The first sign of holy rollers that I could find was in Tampa in September 1909. At that time, they predicted the total destruction of Tampa. The first appearance in Sarasota in March of 1914, they put up a tent on Orange Avenue and held meetings every night. On Saturday, October 20th, 1917, a group of holy rollers in Sarasota stated that on Sunday they would give what would be termed a sideshow, that they would prove the power of the Lord by handling a live rattlesnake during the progress of the morning service, and invited everyone in Sarasota to come out and see the show. In Manatee County, where Sarasota resided until 1921, rattlesnake bites were responsible for many deaths. Rattlesnake bites are not always deadly. Depending on the temperament of the snake, a bite can deliver no venom, more of a warning, a moderate dose of venom, or a deadly dose. On Sunday, about 11:30, Miss Marion Murray, one of the leading spirits of the sect, about 18 years old, had the snake brought in a small wooden box, which she opened, taking the snake out in her bare hands and fondling it. Robert Mixon, another leader of the sect, took the snake away from Marion and handled it. The snake was getting agitated and struck at his coat. The snake was put back in the box, and a spectator started jabbing at the snake with a large cane knife. Miss Murray grabbed the snake's tail with her left hand and held it out so it could do no damage. However, the snake, aroused, doubled up and struck her on top of the left forearm. Marion stood for 10 minutes and shouted, "Praise the Lord, glory to God," etc., before she dropped to the floor. After a few minutes, she was taken into the house by her sister, but no effort was made to secure medical help to alleviate her suffering. The family of the victim going about the house in company with others of the sect, praising the Lord and praying. Marion died that afternoon at 5 o'clock. She was buried at Ellington on Monday, a large number of holy rollers attending. Campfire Girls. The Campfire Girls was formed in Sarasota in 1913 by the Woman's Club. 3 camps were formed, led by Mrs. E. J. Bacon, Mrs. George McAlpin, Jr., and Mrs. Josephine Pierce. Mrs. Bruce was appointed as chief guardian. The camps chose their names from a book on Seminole Indians owned by Mrs. Minnie Moore Wilson. 2 years later, the book, A List of Indian Words, was published for the Campfire Girls. The names chosen for the 3 camps were Okeechobee Camp, the Cherokee Camp, and the Swastika Camp. Miss Josephine Pierce was the guardian of the Swastika Camp, which contained daughters of some of the more important families such as Helveston, Hill, Jones, Chaplain, and Heigl. Remember, this took place well before the 1930s and World War II. The swastika has been used by completely unrelated cultures around the globe for thousands of years. It has been some sort of promising, optimistic, hopeful symbol. In each North American culture, it had its own meaning. It has been found in the Mississippian culture, mound building sites. The Sarasota Times, as well as other newspapers, used the swastika as a border ornament for advertising. Sarasota street signs. What if you wanted to visit a relative or friend in a town you hadn't been before? You arrived in your car and knew what street you wanted. However, you find that there are no street signs, and when you ask for directions, the people only knew street names within a few blocks of where they live. In November of 1910, the same year Bertha Palmer first visited Sarasota, Owen Burns, also a newcomer to the town, made a proposition to the town council to pass an ordinance requiring street signs to be placed on all intersections. The remaining problem was that no building had addresses on them. That was solved later when the post office started delivery service. Pelicans. With the U.S. entry into World War I, rationing was enforced so that food and equipment would be available for the U.S. soldiers. Around 1917, the rumor was spread that the pelicans were eating all the fish, so locals started shooting the pelicans even after a law was enacted to save the birds. There was an editorial written in the Sarasota Times by Captain George Kepler arguing against the killing of pelicans. Don't provide your boys with rifles and other small arms, but teach them to love our feathered friends. Please remember that there are hundreds of times more porpoises and sharks in these waters than there are pelicans. It took many decades before the white pelicans would come back to the Sun Coast in large numbers. Calomel, mercuric chloride. Calomel, mercuric chloride, came into use by the Western world in the 1600s. By the 19th century, calomel was seen as a miracle drug and was used to cure almost every disease. Through experimentation on dogs, J. Annesley concluded calomel acted more like a laxative on the whole body rather than acting on the vascular system or liver as previously thought. Parents hoping to ease teething pain of their infants rubbed one of many available calomel-containing teething powders into their baby's sore gums. In 1853, calomel was found to cause in children gangrene of the skin, loss of teeth, and deterioration of the gums. Some treatments are of historical interest. The three physicians attending General Washington's final hours administered calomel to the dying president. Lewis and Clark carried it on their expedition and used it to treat their men's STDs. Louisa May Alcott, author of Little Women, suffered from its effects. Others included were Napoleon Bonaparte, Edgar Allan Poe, and Andrew Jackson. Even today, several cases of mercury poisoning have been attributed to facial creams containing calomel. Such creams are banned in the United States because mercury is readily absorbed through the skin. Advertisements. I will be showing advertisements listed in the Sarasota Times and the Manatee River Journal. Around 1900, Sarasota had a population about half of Bradenton, and Bradenton had a population about a sixth of Tampa. Obviously, national ads would hit the larger metropolitan cities and eventually filter down to the smaller cities and towns. So these products would have existed years before advertising here. Along with the ads, I will add some non-local information, mostly from Wikipedia, about the products. Do you remember Buster Brown and his dog Tiggy? Buster Brown was a comic strip character created in 1902 by Richard F. Outcault. Adopted as a mascot of the Brown Shoe Company in 1904, Buster Brown, his sister Mary Jane, and his dog Tiggy were well known to the American public in the early 20th century. The character's name was also used to describe a popular style of suit for young boys, the Buster Brown suit, that echoed his own outfit. Here is a 1914 ad from the Sarasota Times announcing the arrival of Buster Brown. Here is an ad from the Manatee River Journal using the Buster Brown icons to advertise the W.B. Coursey establishment. Tiggy was highlighted in later ads for the George B. Prime's Sarasota hardware store. Mr. Prime had a long series of entertaining ads during the 19-teen years. George Prime had also used another character from Richard Outcault's cartoons, the Yellow Kid, in his ads. The Yellow Kid is an American comic strip character that appeared from 1895 to 1898 in Joseph Pulitzer's New York World and later William Randolph Hearst's New York Journal. Created and drawn by Outcault in the comic strip Hogan's Alley, it was one of the first Sunday supplement comic strips in an American newspaper. Outcault's use of word balloons in the Yellow Kid influenced the basic appearance and use of balloons in subsequent newspaper comic strips and comic books. An early ad for Coca-Cola in Bradentown, and an article about the contents of Coca-Cola from August 1896. Before 1900, Coca-Cola was considered a nerve tonic, a combination of the African and South American coca plant. Some other early ads for beverages: Hires Root Beer, Welch's Grape Juice, Chase and Sanborn Coffee, and Lipton Tea. Hires Root Beer was created by Charles Elmer Hires in 1876 and considered the second longest continuously made soft drink in the United States. Verner's Ginger Ale, dating to 1866, is older. Thomas B. Welch invented a method of pasteurizing grape juice to halt the fermentation process and created the product Welch's Grape Juice in 1869. The Chase and Sanborn Coffee Company was established in Boston by Caleb Chase and James S. Sanborn in 1862. It claimed to be the first company to pack and ship roasted coffee in sealed tins. Lipton Tea. Sir Thomas Lipton of Glasgow, Scotland, in 1871 owned grocery stores and tea fields in today's Sri Lanka. He established the Thomas J. Lipton Tea Packaging Company in Hoboken, New Jersey, and was the first to start selling tea bags and the first to print brewing instructions on the tea bag labels. Ads for breakfast cereals: Ralston Breakfast Food, Shredded Wheat, Quaker Oats, and Quaker Oatmeal. In 1898, William H. Danforth of the Ralston Purina Company in 1894 created a cracked wheat cereal that became known as Ralston Whole Wheat Cereal after Dr. Ralston, Albert W. Edgerly, a well-known health promoter of the 1890s. Shredded wheat was the invention of Henry Perky of Denver, Colorado in 1892. He made a product made of boiled wheat and developed a machine with William Ford of Watertown, New York, that made the biscuits. Perky wanted to sell the machines, not the biscuits, but the cereal was so popular he formed the Boston Shredded Cereal Food Company, and in 1895 the Shredded Wheat Company in Worcester, Massachusetts. In 1877, the Quaker Mill Company of Ravenna, Ohio was founded. The name was chosen when Quaker Mill partner Henry Seymour found an encyclopedia article on Quakers and decided that the qualities described, integrity, honesty, purity, provided an appropriate identity for the company's oat product. In 1881, Henry Crowell bought the Quaker Mill Company, and the following year he launched a national advertising campaign for Quaker Oats, introducing a cereal box that made it possible to buy in quantities other than bulk. C.W. Post was an early inventor of farm equipment, but he couldn't handle stress very well. He had 2 nervous breakdowns before he sought treatment at the Battle Creek Sanitarium in Michigan. The sanitarium was run by Dr. John Harvey Kellogg of Corn Flakes fame. Kellogg and his brother W.K. Kellogg were into experimenting with dishes that would best maintain the gut health of the patients who were admitted in the sanitarium. During his stay there, Post was served and exposed to the making of Kellogg's invention granola, a mixture of cornmeal and oats. Kellogg, a deeply religious Seventh-day Adventist, believed that eating something bland and easily digestible was the cure to many forms of illnesses. He also believed in a diet without alcohol, coffee, or meat. Among his clients were Thomas Edison and Henry Ford. Post wanted to sell the cereal he was served in the sanitarium to people in the outside world. Having learned the ways from the Kellogg brothers, he invented a cereal-based drink called Postum as an alternative to coffee. Grape Nuts cereal was his second product. Grape Nuts is made with only wheat and barley. Originally, according to Grape Nuts' official website, the ingredients were mixed and poured into a sheet and baked in the oven. Once hard, it was broken into large chunks and then into smaller nut-sized nuggets using a coffee grinder. Studebaker was an American wagon and automobile manufacturer based in South Bend, Indiana, founded in 1852 and incorporated in 1868 as the Studebaker Brothers Manufacturing Company. The firm was originally a coach builder, manufacturing wagons, buggies, carriages, and harnesses. In 1898, Studebaker produced a single battery-powered electric car. It became a product line from 1902 to 1912. In 1918, it had 3 product lines: the Studebaker Light 4, the Light 6, and the Big 6 above. The other model shown above was the 1952 Studebaker Starlight Coupe. In 1863, the Butterick family sold patterns from their home in Sterling, Massachusetts, and a year later from a factory in New York City. Originally creating patterns for boys and men's clothing, they expanded to dresses and women's clothes in 1866. McCall Pattern Company was created by a Scottish tailor, James McCall. He started printing information onto pattern pieces in 1919. He started McCall's magazine in 1873. The Ladies' Home Journal was developed in 1882 from a double-page supplement, Women at Home, in the magazine Tribute and Farmer. It was written by the wife of the magazine publisher Cyrus H.K. Curtis, Louisa Knapp Curtis. A year later, it became an independent magazine named Ladies' Home Journal and Practical Housekeeper. In 1886, Knapp dropped the last 3 words. From 1891, it was published in Philadelphia by the Curtis Publishing Company. In 1903, it was the first American magazine to reach 1 million subscribers. This is a cartoon from the Sarasota Herald dated October 22, 1925. It tried to forecast what women's styles would be 50 years later in 1975. Thank you for attending this issue of Sarasota History.